The silence in courtroom 4B was so thick you could cut it with a blade. Judge Morrison had been ready to sign the divorce papers just 30 seconds ago, his pen hovering over the documents that would have given Adrian Montgomery everything he wanted. The billionaire real estate mogul sat smugly beside his high-priced lawyer, already calculating how he'd split his assets with his young mistress after discarding his wife like yesterday's newspaper. But then Camila Montgomery stood up. She wasn't the broken, defeated woman Adrian expected to see after 3 years of lies, cheating, and emotional abuse. Instead, she looked radiant in her navy blue suit, her dark skin glowing under the courtroom's fluorescent lights. Her natural hair was styled perfectly, framing her face with confidence that made every person in that room take notice. "Your Honor," Camila said, her voice steady and clear, "before you sign those papers, I have something the court needs to see." Adrian's smile faltered for the first time that day. His lawyer, Robert Chin, shifted uncomfortably in his expensive leather chair. They had expected this to be simple, a quick divorce where the wealthy husband kept his fortune and the wife walked away with whatever scraps of dignity she could manage. "What is it, Mrs. Montgomery?" Judge Morrison asked, setting his pen down with curiosity. Camila reached into her briefcase and pulled out a manila folder. The papers inside weren't wrinkled or hastily prepared. They looked official, important, and absolutely terrifying to the man who had spent the last hour bragging about how he'd outsmarted his wife. "This is a prenuptial agreement, Your Honor. One that my husband signed 5 years ago, 3 months before our wedding." The color drained from Adrian's face so fast that people in the gallery gasped audibly. His perfectly styled blonde hair suddenly looked disheveled as he ran his hands through it, and his blue eyes, the same ones that had charmed investors out of millions, now darted frantically between his lawyer and his wife. "That's impossible," Adrian whispered, but his voice cracked like a teenager's. Robert Chin snatched the papers from Camila's outstretched hand, his face growing paler with each line he read. The cocky attorney who had walked into court that morning talking about easy victories was now sweating through his $1,000 suit. "Your Honor," Robert stammered, "we need time to review these documents. My client doesn't recall signing any such agreement." Judge Morrison took the prenup and began reading. His eyebrows climbed higher with each paragraph, and by the time he reached the 3rd page, his mouth had fallen open completely. "Mr. Montgomery," the judge said slowly, "are you telling this court that you don't remember signing a document that states, and I quote, 'Should the husband engage in marital infidelity at any point during this union, all assets, properties, businesses, and financial holdings shall transfer entirely to the wife, with the husband retaining no claim to any shared wealth accumulated during or before the marriage?'" The courtroom erupted. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks while photographers tried to get the perfect shot of Adrian's breakdown. His mistress, Sophia Bennett, sat in the back row with her mouth hanging open, probably calculating how quickly she could run from this disaster. Adrian's hands shook as he stared at the signature on the bottom of the agreement. It was definitely his handwriting, complete with the same dramatic flourish he'd used to sign billion-dollar deals. The date was clear. March 15th, 3 months before their wedding, just like Camila said. "I don't understand," Adrian muttered, his voice barely audible over the courtroom chaos. "I never would have signed this. I'm not stupid. Why would I give away everything I've built?" Camila smiled for the first time since walking into court that morning. It wasn't a cruel smile or a vengeful one. It was the smile of a woman who had played chess while her opponent was playing checkers. "Because Adrian," she said, her voice carrying across the silent courtroom, "you were so certain that you'd never get caught. You thought I was just some simple girl who'd be grateful for whatever crumbs you threw my way. You never bothered to read what you were signing because you believed your own lies about being untouchable." She turned to face him fully, and Adrian saw something in her brown eyes that he'd never noticed during their 5 years of marriage. Intelligence. Strategy. Strength that had been there all along, waiting for the right moment to surface. "You forgot that my father was a lawyer for 40 years before he retired. You forgot that I have a master's degree in finance. Most importantly, you forgot that underestimating people has consequences." Judge Morrison banged his gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order to the chaos that had consumed his courtroom. When the noise finally died down, he looked directly at Adrian with something that might have been pity. "Mr. Montgomery, do you contest the validity of this signature?" Adrian stared at the prenup again, knowing that handwriting analysis would only confirm what everyone already knew. He had signed away his entire empire because he was too arrogant to read the fine print. "No, Your Honor," he whispered. And with those 3 words, the man who had spent his entire adult life building a business empire watched it crumble before his eyes, all because he thought his wife was too naive to fight back. 5 years earlier, Camila Roberts had been living a completely different life. She worked as a senior financial analyst at Morrison & Associates, a mid-sized investment firm in downtown Chicago. Her days were filled with spreadsheets, client meetings, and the quiet satisfaction that came from helping people make smart decisions with their money. She lived in a modest one-bedroom apartment in Lincoln Park, drove a reliable Honda Civic, and spent her weekends reading financial journals or visiting her parents in their South Side home. At 28, Camila had built a stable, predictable life that suited her perfectly. Adrian Montgomery changed all of that. He walked into her office on a Tuesday morning in February, bringing with him the kind of presence that made everyone stop and stare. At 35, Adrian was already worth over $2 billion, with a real estate empire that stretched across the Midwest. His company, Montgomery Developments, had transformed Chicago's skyline with luxury hotels, upscale condominiums, and commercial complexes that bore his name. "Miss Roberts," he said, extending a hand that had signed deals worth more money than most people saw in a lifetime. "I've heard excellent things about your work. I'm looking for someone to handle some personal investments." Camila shook his hand professionally, noting the expensive watch on his wrist and the way his tailored suit fit perfectly across his broad shoulders. She had worked with wealthy clients before, but Adrian Montgomery was in a completely different category. "I'd be happy to discuss your needs, Mr. Montgomery. Please have a seat." What followed was the most intense 3 hours of Camila's professional life. Adrian didn't just want investment advice, he wanted to test her knowledge, challenge her assumptions, and see if she could keep up with his rapid-fire questions about market trends, portfolio diversification, and risk management. Camila rose to every challenge. "Most advisors would tell you to put 30% in bonds," she explained, pointing to the charts spread across her desk. "But given your age, risk tolerance, and existing holdings, I think that's too conservative. You have the luxury of taking calculated risks that most people can't afford." Adrian leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Most people tell me what they think I want to hear. You're telling me what I need to hear. I like that." By the end of their meeting, Adrian had not only hired Camila to manage a significant portion of his personal portfolio, but he had also asked her to dinner. "I don't usually mix business with pleasure," Camila said carefully. "Neither do I," Adrian replied, his blue eyes twinkling with charm. "But something tells me you're worth making an exception for." That first dinner led to a second, then a third, then months of the most romantic courtship Camila had ever experienced. Adrian didn't just take her to expensive restaurants, he flew her to Paris for a weekend, chartered yachts for private dinners on Lake Michigan, and surprised her with tickets to sold-out Broadway shows in New York. He met her parents and charmed them completely. Her father, retired attorney Thomas Roberts, was initially skeptical of the wealthy businessman pursuing his daughter. But Adrian won him over with genuine interest in Thomas's legal career and respectful questions about his experiences fighting for civil rights in the 1980s. "He's not what I expected," Thomas told his wife Louise after Adrian's first visit to their home. "Rich men usually have attitudes, but this one listens when you talk. He treats Camila like she's precious." Louise agreed. She watched Adrian help with dishes after dinner, compliment her cooking without being excessive, and speak to Camila with genuine affection. "He looks at her like she's the only woman in the world," she observed. Adrian proposed after 18 months of dating, and it was everything Camila had dreamed of. He took her back to the restaurant where they'd had their first dinner, got down on one knee, and presented her with a 5-carat diamond ring that had been custom designed to match her elegant but understated style. "Camila Roberts," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you've changed my entire world. Before you, I thought success was about money and power. Now I know it's about finding someone who makes you want to be better than you are. Will you marry me?" Through happy tears, Camila said yes. The engagement period was a whirlwind of wedding planning, dress fittings, and venue selections. Adrian insisted on paying for everything, wanting to give Camila the wedding of her dreams. They settled on a beautiful ceremony at the Chicago Botanic Garden, followed by a reception at the Palmer House Hotel. 3 months before the wedding, Adrian sat in Thomas Roberts' study, asking for his blessing to marry Camila. It was during this conversation that Thomas, with 40 years of legal experience behind him, made a suggestion that would eventually destroy Adrian's life. "Son," Thomas said, "I like you. I think you love my daughter genuinely. But you're a wealthy man and wealth brings complications. Have you two discussed a prenuptial agreement?" Adrian shifted uncomfortably. "We've talked about it briefly. Camila said she doesn't want one. She thinks it shows a lack of faith in our marriage." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. My daughter is romantic, and that's one of her beautiful qualities. But romance doesn't protect people when things go wrong. Not that I think they will, he added quickly, but preparation isn't pessimism. It's wisdom. What are you suggesting? Let me draft something simple. Something that protects both of you. If your marriage is as strong as I believe it will be, you'll never need to look at it again. Adrian agreed, mainly because he respected Thomas and wanted to maintain a good relationship with his future father-in-law. A week later, Thomas presented him with a prenuptial agreement that appeared straightforward and fair. Adrian skimmed through it quickly, noting clauses about property division and spousal support that seemed reasonable. His own lawyers had prepared prenups before, and this one looked standard. Besides, he was confident in his marriage and certain that he and Camila would be together forever. He signed it without reading the fine print, a decision that would prove to be the most expensive mistake of his life. The wedding was perfect. Camila looked stunning in her ivory silk gown, and Adrian couldn't take his eyes off her during the entire ceremony. As they danced their first dance as husband and wife, surrounded by 200 guests in the elegant ballroom, Adrian whispered in her ear, "I love you, Mrs. Montgomery. I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret marrying me." Camila smiled up at her new husband, completely unaware that hidden in the prenup they'd signed was a clause that would one day give her everything he owned. For Adrian, it was the beginning of what he thought would be a perfect marriage. He had no idea he'd just signed his own financial death warrant. The first 2 years of marriage were everything Camila had hoped for and more. Adrian was attentive, loving, and generous with both his time and affection. They traveled together frequently, combining business trips with romantic getaways to places Camila had only dreamed of visiting. Their penthouse apartment in downtown Chicago became a warm, welcoming home filled with art they'd collected together and photographs from their adventures. Adrian encouraged Camila to continue her career, even investing in the expansion of Morrison and Associates so she could take on more challenging projects. "I married a brilliant woman," he would tell friends at dinner parties. "The last thing I want is for her to waste that brain sitting at home planning charity galas." Camila thrived in this environment. With Adrian's connections and her expertise, her client list grew to include some of Chicago's most prominent families. She was featured in Financial Planning magazine as one of the top 30 under 30 advisors in the Midwest, an achievement that made Adrian beam with pride. But somewhere during their third year of marriage things began to shift. It started small. Adrian began working later hours, often not coming home until well past midnight. When Camila asked about his schedule, he explained that Montgomery Developments was expanding into new markets, requiring more of his personal attention. "The Indianapolis project is more complicated than we expected," he told her one evening as she waited for him to come to bed. "I need to be hands-on with this one. You understand, right?" Camila did understand. She knew how demanding business could be, and Adrian had always been a workaholic. She tried to be supportive, even when their dinner dates became less frequent and their weekend trips started getting canceled for urgent business matters. The next change was his phone behavior. Adrian had never been secretive about his calls or messages, often answering business calls during their personal time and including Camila in conversations when appropriate. Now, his phone never left his side, and he stepped out of rooms to take calls that he claimed were boring legal stuff. "Who was that?" Camila asked one Saturday morning after Adrian spent 20 minutes on the phone in their bedroom, speaking in hushed tones. "Just Robert, going over contracts," Adrian replied without meeting her eyes. "Nothing interesting." But Camila had heard him laugh during the conversation, the kind of warm, genuine laugh he used to save for her. Boring legal conversations with Robert Chin didn't usually involve laughter. The physical distance came next. Adrian began staying late at the office more frequently, sometimes not coming home at all. He claimed he was sleeping at the company apartment to avoid disturbing her when he worked past 2 a.m. "You work so hard during the day," he said, kissing her forehead on his way out one Thursday evening. "I don't want to wake you up stumbling around in the dark." Their intimate life, once passionate and frequent, became sporadic and mechanical. When Camila tried to initiate affection, Adrian often claimed exhaustion or cited early morning meetings. She began to feel like a roommate rather than a wife. The breaking point came on their third wedding anniversary. Camila had planned a special evening. She left work early, bought ingredients for Adrian's favorite meal, and set the table with their wedding china and the candles from their honeymoon in Italy. She wore the red dress he'd bought her in Paris, the one he always said made her look like a goddess. Adrian came home 3 hours late. "I'm sorry, baby," he said, loosening his tie as he walked through the door. "The Peterson deal hit a snag." I had to stay and handle it personally. Camila looked at the cold dinner, the melted candles, and the wilted flowers she'd arranged hours earlier. It's our anniversary, Adrian. I know. I'm terrible. How about we do something special this weekend instead? Make up for tonight? We've been planning this for weeks. I told you about dinner. You said you'd be home by 7. Adrian sighed, running his hands through his hair in a gesture that had once seemed endearing but now felt dismissive. Look, Camila, you know how important this business is. The Peterson deal is worth $50 million. That's more important than one dinner. The words hung in the air between them like a slap. More important than our marriage? Camila asked quietly. Don't be dramatic. It's just dinner. We can have dinner any night. That night, Camila lay awake staring at the ceiling while Adrian slept peacefully beside her, wondering when she had become just dinner in her husband's life. The next morning she made a decision that would change everything. She opened Adrian's credit card statements, something she'd never done before. As his wife and business partner in their personal finances, she had access to everything, but she'd always trusted him to handle his own accounts. What she found made her stomach drop. Expensive dinners at restaurants she'd never been to, hotel charges in cities where Adrian hadn't mentioned, business trips, jewelry purchases from Tiffany & Company that she'd never received, and flower deliveries to addresses she didn't recognize. The most damning entry was from their anniversary night. A $500 charge at Le Bernardin, an upscale restaurant across town, at exactly the time Adrian claimed to be in a business meeting. Camila's hands shook as she looked at more statements. The pattern was clear and devastating. For the past 8 months, Adrian had been living a double life, spending money on someone else while telling his wife that business was keeping him away. She printed out everything and hid the papers in her home office, her mind racing with questions she didn't want answered. Who was he with? How long had this been going on? Were the late nights and distant behavior all lies? That evening, Adrian came home with flowers and an apology about missing their anniversary dinner. Forgive me? He asked, presenting her with a bouquet of roses. Camila looked at the flowers, knowing they were probably a guilt purchase, and made a decision that surprised her with its clarity. Of course, she said, forcing a smile. I understand how demanding work can be. But inside, she was already planning her next move. If Adrian wanted to play games, he was about to discover that his wife was much better at strategy than he'd ever imagined. The war had begun, and Adrian didn't even know he was fighting. Camila's investigation into Adrian's secret life became an obsession that consumed her thoughts during the day and kept her awake at night. She approached it with the same methodical precision she used for financial analysis, treating her marriage like a case study in deception. She hired a private investigator named Patricia Williams, a former Chicago police detective who specialized in marital investigations. Patricia was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who had seen every form of infidelity imaginable and approached each case with professional detachment. Mrs. Montgomery, Patricia said during their first meeting at a coffee shop far from Adrian's usual haunts, I need you to prepare yourself for what we might find. Sometimes the truth is worse than people expect. I need to know, Camila replied firmly. I can't make decisions based on suspicions and credit card statements. Within a week, Patricia had answers. The other woman was Sophia Bennett, the 26-year-old daughter of Richard Bennett, Adrian's longtime business partner and closest friend. Sophia worked as a marketing coordinator for Bennett & Associates, though it was clear from Patricia's photographs that her job duties extended far beyond advertising campaigns. They've been meeting regularly for 10 months, Patricia explained, sliding a manila folder across the table. Hotels, restaurants, her apartment on the north side. Yesterday I followed them to a jewelry store where your husband spent 45 minutes helping her choose a necklace. Camila opened the folder with steady hands, though her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The photographs were devastating in their clarity. Adrian and Sophia laughing over dinner. Adrian's hand on Sophia's lower back as they walked into a hotel. Adrian kissing her in the front seat of his Mercedes, completely oblivious to the camera capturing his betrayal. Sophia was everything Camila wasn't: young, blonde, petite, and apparently thrilled to be dating a married billionaire. In every photograph, she looked up at Adrian with the kind of adoring expression that Camila remembered wearing during their early courtship. There's more, Patricia said gently. I followed her to a real estate office yesterday. She was looking at luxury condos downtown. The kind that cost more than most people's houses. Camila studied a photograph of Adrian and Sophia touring a penthouse apartment, his arm around her waist possessively. He's planning to set her up in her own place. That would be my guess. He's probably waiting for the right time to ask for a divorce. The irony wasn't lost on Camila. While she was at home trying to save their marriage, Adrian was across town shopping for love nests with his girlfriend. She spent that evening researching everything she could find about Sophia Bennett. Social media profiles revealed a young woman who loved expensive restaurants, designer handbags, and posting cryptic quotes about destiny and following your heart. Her Instagram was filled with photos from exotic vacations and high-end shopping trips that a marketing coordinator's salary couldn't possibly afford. The most painful discovery came from Sophia's Facebook page. Hidden among photos of mimosa brunches and gym selfies was a picture posted 3 weeks earlier, a close-up shot of a woman's hand wearing an enormous diamond bracelet. The caption read, "Sometimes good girls get the best surprises, smiling face with heart eyes, red heart, #blessed, #worth the wait." Camila recognized the bracelet immediately. She'd admired it during a shopping trip to Tiffany & Company, pointing it out to Adrian as they walked past the display case. At the time, he dismissed it as overpriced sparkly nonsense, but apparently it was perfect for his mistress. The betrayal went deeper than just infidelity. Adrian hadn't just cheated on her, he'd given another woman the gifts, attention, and affection that should have been hers. He'd listened to Sophia's preferences and remembered her tastes while forgetting his own wife's birthday. Camila's phone rang while she was staring at the photos, and Adrian's name appeared on the screen. "Hey, beautiful." His voice came through with the same warmth he'd always used. "I'm going to be late again tonight. This Bennett project is kicking my ass." The lies came so easily to him that Camila wondered how long he'd been practicing deception. The Bennett project, technically true, since he was definitely working on something involving the Bennett family, just not in the way he was implying. "Will you be very late?" Camila asked, keeping her voice light and understanding. "Probably past midnight. Don't wait up, okay? You need your beauty sleep, although God knows you don't need any help in that department." Even his compliments felt hollow now. Camila wondered if he practiced the same smooth talking on Sophia, or if their conversations were more authentic than the performance he gave his wife. After hanging up, Camila made a decision that surprised her with its boldness. She was going to confront the situation head-on, but not in the way anyone would expect. She dressed carefully in her most confident outfit, a black suit that made her look powerful and professional, and drove to the address Patricia had given her for Sophia's apartment building. She didn't have a plan beyond getting a closer look at the woman who had stolen her husband's attention. The building was exactly what she'd expected. A modern high-rise in a trendy neighborhood, the kind of place where young professionals lived when they wanted to feel sophisticated but couldn't afford actual luxury. Camila parked across the street and waited. At 9:30 p.m., Adrian's Mercedes pulled up to the building. Camila watched her husband get out of the car, straighten his tie, and walk into the building with the confident stride of a man who believed he was untouchable. 45 minutes later, she saw them together through the large windows on the 8th floor. Adrian and Sophia were having dinner by candlelight, playing house in a way that made Camila's chest tight with rage and heartbreak. Sophia was even prettier in person than in the photographs, with long blonde hair and the kind of effortless beauty that came from youth and being adored. She hung on Adrian's every word, laughing at his jokes and reaching across the table to touch his hand with obvious affection. Adrian looked happier than Camila had seen him in months. He was animated, engaged, and completely focused on the young woman across from him. It was the way he used to look at Camila during their courtship, before marriage became routine and she became part of the furniture in his life. Watching them together, Camila finally understood the full scope of her situation. This wasn't just an affair, it was a replacement. Adrian hadn't just found someone to sleep with, he'd found someone he wanted to build a life with. Someone younger, less challenging, and more impressed by his wealth and power. The realization should have broken her heart, but instead, it crystallized her resolve. Adrian thought he could discard her like an outdated business plan, trading her in for a newer model. He thought she would quietly accept whatever divorce settlement he offered, grateful for whatever scraps he chose to throw her way. He was about to learn how wrong he could be. Camila drove home with a clear sense of purpose. The next phase of her plan would require patience, strategy, and the kind of calculated thinking that had made her one of Chicago's most successful financial advisors. Adrian wanted to play games with her life? Fine. But he was about to discover that his wife was much better at winning than he'd ever imagined. The morning after seeing Adrian with Sophia, Camila woke up with a clarity she hadn't felt in months. The heartbreak was still there, sharp and persistent, but it was overshadowed by something stronger: determination. She called in sick to work, something she'd done maybe 3 times in her entire career, and spent the morning sitting in her home office, staring at the wall safe where Adrian kept important documents. She'd always known the combination their wedding date but had never had reason to open it. Today was different. Inside the safe, she found exactly what she expected: property deeds, insurance policies, investment certificates, and legal documents spanning Adrian's entire business empire. What she didn't expect was to find a folder marked "Personal Marriage" that she'd never seen before. With trembling fingers, Camila opened the folder and found documents that made her catch her breath. There were copies of divorce papers from Adrian's first marriage, settlement agreements from business disputes, and medical records from a surgery she hadn't known he'd had. At the bottom of the folder was a manila envelope with her father's law firm letterhead, dated 3 months before their wedding. Inside was a copy of their prenuptial agreement, the same one she'd produced in court 5 years later. But this version had handwritten notes in the margins. Camila recognized her father's neat handwriting immediately. Thomas Roberts had annotated the entire document, explaining legal terms and highlighting specific clauses that he considered important. One section was marked with a yellow highlighter and surrounded by exclamation points. The clause in question was buried on page 4, hidden among standard language about property division and spousal support. In dense legal terminology, it stated that any assets acquired during the marriage would be subject to immediate and complete forfeiture if either party engaged in marital misconduct, including but not limited to adultery, emotional abandonment, or breach of marital trust. Her father's handwritten note next to this section read, "This clause is ironclad. If signed, it would supersede all other asset division requirements in case of infidelity. Recommend careful review and possible revision." Below that, in different ink, was another note. Adrian signed without requesting changes or legal review. Agreement is valid and enforceable as written. Camila stared at the document in amazement. Her father had built the perfect trap and Adrian had walked right into it. Not only had he signed away his fortune in case of cheating, but he'd done so without even consulting his own lawyers. She pulled out her phone and called her father. "Dad, it's me. I need to ask you about something, and I need you to be completely honest." Thomas Roberts had been waiting for this call for almost a year. He'd seen the changes in his daughter, noticed the sadness she tried to hide behind professional success and social obligations. As a lawyer who'd handled dozens of divorce cases, he recognized the signs of a marriage in trouble. "What do you need to know, sweetheart?" "The prenup you wrote for Adrian and me. Did you design it to protect me specifically?" There was a long pause before her father answered. "Camila, I've been practicing law for over 40 years. In that time, I've seen too many good women get destroyed by powerful men who think money makes them untouchable. When Adrian asked me to write that prenup, I saw an opportunity to make sure my daughter would never be one of those women." "So you knew he might cheat?" "I didn't know anything for certain. But I knew he was a wealthy, successful man who was used to getting everything he wanted. Men like that often think marriage vows are suggestions rather than commitments. I wanted to make sure that if he ever betrayed you, there would be consequences." Camila felt tears threatening but pushed them back. This wasn't the time for crying. "Dad, he's been having an affair for almost a year. I'm sorry, baby girl. I'm sorry you're going through this, but I'm not sorry I protected you. What do you want to do?" "I want to destroy him." Thomas was quiet for a moment. Then he chuckled, the sound both proud and sad. "You sound like your mother when she's really angry. Okay, let's talk strategy." Over the next 2 hours, Thomas explained exactly how devastating the prenup would be for Adrian. Not only would he lose everything acquired during their marriage, but the complete forfeiture clause meant he would also lose assets he'd brought into the marriage if those assets had been commingled with their joint finances. "He deposited his business profits into your joint accounts," Thomas explained. "He used marital funds to expand his company. He put your name on property deeds for tax purposes. In the eyes of the law, his entire empire became marital property the moment he started mixing personal and business finances." "What does that mean exactly?" "It means that when this prenup is enforced, Adrian Montgomery will go from billionaire to broke in one court session. He'll lose his company, his properties, his investments, even his cars and jewelry. Everything except what he can prove he owned before marriage and kept completely separate, which, based on what you're telling me, is probably just his childhood home that his parents left him." The magnitude of Adrian's mistake was staggering. In his arrogance, he'd not only signed a document that would destroy him financially, but he'd also structured his finances in exactly the way that would make that destruction complete. "There's one more thing," Thomas added. "The prenup includes a clause about legal fees. If it's enforced due to his misconduct, he has to pay all your attorney costs and court fees. he'll be financing his own destruction. Camila hung up the phone feeling like she'd just been handed a nuclear weapon. The power to completely destroy Adrian's life was literally in her hands, signed and sealed by his own overconfidence. She spent the rest of the day gathering additional evidence of Adrian's affairs. Bank statements, credit card bills, hotel receipts, restaurant charges, everything that painted a clear picture of a man who'd been systematically betraying his wife while financing his infidelity with their shared resources. The irony was perfect. Adrian had used their money to fund his relationship with Sophia, unknowingly providing the evidence that would cost him everything. That evening, Adrian came home early with flowers and a bottle of expensive wine. "I thought we could have a quiet dinner together," he said, kissing her cheek with practiced affection. "I've been working too much lately. I want to focus on us." Camila accepted the flowers graciously, wondering if guilt had finally caught up with him or if Sophia was busy with other plans. "That sounds wonderful," she said, matching his fake enthusiasm with her own. "I'll cook your favorite dinner." As she prepared the meal, Adrian sat at their kitchen island, telling her stories about his day and asking about her work with the same polite interest he might show a business acquaintance. Everything felt hollow and performative, like they were both acting out roles in a play neither of them wanted to be in. "Camila," Adrian said as they sat down to eat, "I know I haven't been the best husband lately. The business has been demanding, and I feel like I've been neglecting you." Camila looked across the table at the man she'd once loved completely, wondering if anything about him had ever been real. "We all go through busy periods," she said carefully. "I want to make it up to you. How about we take a vacation? Just the two of us. Somewhere tropical where I can't think about work." The offer should have made her happy, but all Camila could think about was how many vacations he'd probably promised Sophia. "That sounds nice. When were you thinking? Maybe next month? I should have the Indianapolis project wrapped up by then." Another lie. Patricia had already confirmed that the Indianapolis project had been completed weeks ago. Adrian was buying time, probably trying to figure out how to ask for a divorce without looking like the villain. "I'd love that," Camila said, playing along with his charade. That night, as Adrian slept peacefully beside her, Camila stared at the ceiling and made her final decision. She wasn't going to wait for him to ask for a divorce on his terms. She wasn't going to let him control the narrative or the timeline. Tomorrow she would begin the process of taking back her life. And Adrian Montgomery would learn that underestimating his wife was the most expensive mistake he'd ever made. The next morning, Camila began executing a plan that would have impressed any military strategist. While Adrian showered and prepared for another day of lies, she called her best friend Zoe Patterson, a brilliant attorney who specialized in corporate law and had never liked Adrian. "I need your help," Camila said without preamble when Zoe answered her phone. "What kind of help? And please tell me it involves finally dealing with your cheating husband." Camila wasn't surprised that Zoe had figured out the truth. As Adrian's behavior had become more distant and suspicious, Zoe had been watching with the sharp eyes of someone who'd seen too many marriages implode. "Meet me for lunch today. Somewhere private. And bring your legal expertise." 3 hours later, they sat in a quiet corner of a restaurant 20 miles from downtown Chicago, surrounded by documents that would end Adrian's life as he knew it. Zoe whistled softly as she reviewed the prenup. "Your father is brilliant. This thing is bulletproof. Adrian signed away everything. That's what Dad said. But I need to make sure we have enough evidence to prove infidelity beyond any doubt. What do you have so far?" Camila spread out bank statements, credit card bills, hotel receipts, and Patricia's photographs. The evidence painted a clear picture of systematic deception spanning nearly a year. "This is good," Zoe said, studying the financial records. "But we need more. We need witnesses, electronic evidence, maybe even recordings of him admitting to the affair." "How do I get recordings?" "Illinois is a one-party consent state. That means you can record conversations without telling him, as long as you're part of the conversation. If he admits to the affair or talks about leaving you for Sophia, that's admissible in court." Over the next 2 weeks, Camila became a master of surveillance and evidence gathering. She installed tracking software on their shared computer and discovered that Adrian had been using their home Wi-Fi to communicate with Sophia through encrypted messaging apps. She found deleted emails in the trash folder that made her stomach churn with their intimacy. Messages where Adrian called Sophia, "my future," and made plans for, "when we can finally be together publicly." In one particularly damaging email, Adrian wrote about how he was tired of pretending to be happy with a wife who doesn't understand my ambitions. Patricia continued her professional surveillance, documenting every meeting between Adrian and Sophia. The photographs now filled 3 thick folders, showing a relationship that had progressed far beyond casual dating. They were photographed holding hands at charity events, shopping for furniture together, and even visiting a wedding venue. "He's planning to marry her," Patricia explained during one of their weekly meetings. "I followed them to a jewelry store yesterday where they spent 2 hours looking at engagement rings." The betrayal was so complete that Camila had to remind herself to feel hurt instead of just angry. Adrian wasn't just cheating, he was building an entire life with someone else while keeping his wife as a placeholder until he figured out how to escape their marriage. But the most devastating evidence came from an unexpected source. Camila had always gotten along well with Richard Bennett, Adrian's business partner and Sophia's father. Richard was a kind, family-oriented man who'd built his construction company from nothing and valued integrity above profit. When he called Camila one evening, she thought he was organizing another couple's dinner. "Camila, I need to talk to you about something," Richard said, his voice heavy with discomfort. "Can we meet somewhere private?" They met at a coffee shop the next morning, where Richard looked like a man carrying the weight of the world. "I found out about Adrian and Sophia," he said without preamble. "I confronted my daughter last night and she told me everything." Camila's heart raced, but she kept her expression neutral. "I'm not sure what you mean. Please don't make this harder than it already is. I know my daughter has been having an affair with your husband. I know it's been going on for months. And I know Adrian has been lying to both of you about his intentions." Richard pulled out his phone and showed Camila a text message conversation between Adrian and Sophia from the night before. In it, Adrian promised Sophia that he would ask for a divorce as soon as I figure out how to keep most of my assets. "He's been using my daughter," Richard continued, his voice filled with disgust. "She thinks he's going to marry her, but he's been telling me privately that she's just a temporary distraction until he gets bored." The conversation revealed Adrian's true character in a way that shocked even Camila. He wasn't just cheating on his wife, he was also manipulating his mistress, leading her to believe in a future he had no intention of providing. "Why are you telling me this?" Camila asked. "Because you deserve better. Because my daughter deserves better. And because Adrian Montgomery needs to face consequences for treating people like they're disposable." Richard agreed to testify in court about Adrian's deception and to provide copies of all communications between Adrian and Sophia that he'd discovered. As Sophia's father and Adrian's business partner, his testimony would be devastating to Adrian's credibility. By the end of the month, Camila had assembled a case that was overwhelming in its thoroughness. Financial records proving Adrian had used marital funds to support his affair. Photographs documenting the relationship over nearly a year. Electronic communications showing his plans to divorce Camila while keeping his wealth. Witness testimony from his own business partner. But she needed one final piece of evidence: Adrian's own admission. The opportunity came on a Friday evening when Adrian suggested they go out for dinner to reconnect as a couple. Camila agreed, wearing a dress with pockets deep enough to conceal her phone's recording app. At the restaurant, ironically, the same place where Adrian had taken Sophia just a week earlier, Camila carefully steered the conversation toward their marriage. "I've been thinking," she said over dessert, "maybe we should consider counseling. I feel like we've been drifting apart." Adrian shifted uncomfortably. "Counseling seems a bit dramatic. We just need to communicate better. Do we? Sometimes I wonder if you'd rather be with someone else." The question hung in the air like a challenge. Adrian's response would either give her the final evidence she needed or force her to find another approach. "That's ridiculous," Adrian said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I married you because I love you. But are you still in love with me?" Adrian stared at his wine glass for a long moment. When he looked up, Camila saw something in his eyes that might have been relief at finally being asked directly. "I think we've both changed," he said carefully. "Maybe we want different things now." "What kind of different things?" "I don't know. Freedom. Excitement. Someone who appreciates what I've built instead of taking it for granted." The words cut deep, but Camila kept her expression neutral. "Are you saying I don't appreciate you?" "I'm saying that maybe we got married too young. Maybe we didn't know who we really were." It wasn't a direct admission, but it was close enough. Combined with all the other evidence, it would paint a clear picture of a man who'd emotionally abandoned his marriage long before physically cheating. "So what are you suggesting?" Camila asked. Adrian took a deep breath, and for a moment, Camila thought he might confess everything. Instead, he reached across the table and took her hand. "I'm suggesting we try harder. Both of us. Maybe take that vacation we talked about." Another lie. Another manipulation. Another attempt to control the situation until he was ready to make his move. Camila smiled and squeezed his hand. I'd like that. But inside she was already planning his destruction. The war was almost over, and Adrian still didn't know he was losing. 3 weeks after that dinner, Adrian made the move Camila had been waiting for. He came home on a Tuesday evening with the nervous energy of a man preparing to change his life forever. We need to talk, he said, pouring himself a drink without offering one to Camila. She looked up from her laptop where she'd been reviewing client portfolios, projecting the perfect image of a wife focused on her own career while her husband prepared to destroy their marriage. That sounds serious, she said, closing the laptop and giving him her full attention. Adrian paced to the window overlooking Chicago's skyline, the city lights reflecting off the glass like stars. For 3 years, this view had represented everything they'd built together. Tonight he was about to tear it all down. I've been doing a lot of thinking about us. About our marriage. About what we both want from life. Camila's phone sat on the coffee table between them, its recording app already activated. Everything Adrian said from this moment forward would be preserved for posterity and legal proceedings. What kind of thinking? She asked gently. I think we're different people than we were when we got married. We want different things. We've grown apart. The script was so predictable that Camila almost felt sorry for him. Adrian was using the same tired phrases that cheating husbands had been using for decades, probably copied from whatever self-help article he'd found about conscious uncoupling. I don't feel like we've grown apart, Camila said, playing her role perfectly. I thought we were happy. Were we though? Really? When's the last time we had a genuine conversation about something that mattered? When's the last time we laughed together or felt excited about our future? The irony of his questions wasn't lost on Camila. Adrian was describing exactly what he'd been doing with Sophia while neglecting his wife. He'd created the distance he was now using to justify ending their marriage. I think that's normal for couples who've been together as long as we have, she said. Marriage takes work. Maybe we just need to try harder. Adrian turned from the window, and Camila saw something in his expression that looked almost like pity. Camila, I don't want to try harder. I don't want to work on us. I want something different. What do you want? I want a divorce. The words hung in the air between them like a death sentence. Adrian had finally said what Camila had been waiting months to hear, but the reality of it still hit her like a physical blow. A divorce? She repeated, injecting just the right amount of shock into her voice. I know this is sudden. Sudden? Adrian, we just talked about taking a vacation together. We just had dinner last week where you said you wanted to reconnect. How is this sudden? I've been thinking about this for a while. I didn't want to hurt you, but staying married when I'm not happy isn't fair to either of us. Camila stood up, pacing to the other side of the room as if she needed distance to process what he was telling her. In reality, she was positioning herself to get the best audio quality for his confession. Is there someone else? She asked, the question every betrayed wife asks when her world falls apart. Adrian hesitated for just a moment, long enough to be damning on the recording. This isn't about someone else. This is about us. That's not what I asked. Camila, please don't make this harder than it has to be. Harder than it has to be? Adrian, you're asking me for a divorce out of nowhere. You're destroying our marriage, our life together, everything we've built. How exactly am I supposed to make this easy? I know you're upset. Upset? I'm devastated. 3 days ago you told me you loved me. Now you want a divorce because you're not happy? What changed? Adrian ran his hands through his hair, the same gesture that had once seemed endearing but now looked like the actions of a guilty man trying to escape responsibility. Nothing changed. That's the problem. We're stuck in a routine. We're like roommates, not husband and wife. Don't you want more than that? I want my husband to fight for our marriage instead of running away the first time things get difficult. This isn't about running away. This is about being honest. I'm not in love with you anymore, Camila. I haven't been for a long time. There it was. The truth that Adrian had been hiding behind months of lies and excuses. He wasn't just cheating, he'd emotionally abandoned their marriage while keeping her as a convenient placeholder. When? Camila asked, her voice breaking slightly. When did you stop loving me? I don't know. It happened gradually. We just grew apart. Or maybe you grew towards someone else. Adrian's face flushed and Camila knew she'd hit the mark. I told you this isn't about another person. Look me in the eye and tell me you haven't been seeing someone else. The silence stretched between them for almost 30 seconds. Adrian opened his mouth several times as if to speak, but no words came. His face went through a dozen expressions: guilt, defiance, resignation, and finally something that looked almost like relief. "Okay," he said quietly. "Yes, there's someone else." The admission should have felt like victory, but instead, it felt like the final nail in the coffin of everything Camila had believed about their marriage. "How long?" she asked. "Does it matter?" "How long, Adrian?" "Almost a year." "A year." Camila sank into a chair, letting the full weight of his betrayal wash over her. "A year of lies. A year of pretending to be my husband while building a life with someone else. I never meant for it to happen. It just did." "Who is she?" Adrian looked like he might refuse to answer, but something in Camila's expression convinced him that the time for secrets was over. "Sophia. Sophia Bennett." "Richard's daughter? Your business partner's daughter?" "Yes." "The girl who's barely older than your niece? The one you've watched grow up?" "She's not a girl, Camila. She's a woman. A woman who appreciates what I've accomplished, who's excited about building a future together." The words were like acid, burning away the last vestiges of respect Camila had for the man she'd married. "So you've been planning a future with her while lying to me about business trips and late meetings." "I was trying to figure out how to handle this situation without destroying everyone's lives." "You mean you were trying to figure out how to keep your money while trading me in for a younger model?" Adrian's expression hardened. "Don't make this about money, Camila. You'll be fine. You have your career, your education. You don't need me to take care of you. But I am your wife. That means something, Adrian. Or it should. It means we had a good run, but now it's over. I'm sorry it has to end this way, but I'm not going to spend the rest of my life in a marriage that makes me miserable." Camila stood up slowly, her mind racing with everything she'd just heard. Adrian had given her exactly what she needed: a complete confession, recorded and undeniable. "What happens now?" she asked. "I'll have my lawyer draw up divorce papers. We'll split everything fairly. You can keep the apartment if you want, and obviously I'll make sure you're taken care of financially." The condescension in his voice was breathtaking. Adrian was offering her scraps from his table while planning to keep the feast for himself and his new girlfriend. "How generous of you," Camila said quietly. "I know you're angry, but this is for the best. We'll both be happier apart." Adrian walked over and tried to put his hand on her shoulder, but Camila stepped away. "Don't touch me," she said. "Don't ever touch me again. Camila, get out. Go to your girlfriend's apartment. I'm sure she's waiting for you to celebrate your newfound freedom." Adrian looked like he might argue, but something in Camila's eyes warned him not to push his luck. "I'll stay at the company apartment tonight. We can talk more when you've had time to process this." "There's nothing more to talk about. You want a divorce? Fine. But don't expect me to make it easy for you." After Adrian left, Camila sat alone in their apartment, listening to the recording of their conversation. His voice, preserved forever, admitting to a year of lies and betrayal. His casual dismissal of their marriage. His assumption that she would quietly accept whatever he chose to give her. Tomorrow she would take that recording to Zoe and begin the legal process that would destroy Adrian's life. Tonight, she allowed herself one moment of grief for the marriage she'd thought she had and the man she'd believed she'd married. Then she dried her tears and began planning his annihilation. The divorce hearing was scheduled for 10 a.m. on a crisp October morning, exactly 6 weeks after Adrian's confession. As Camila walked into the courthouse wearing her most professional navy suit, she looked like a woman prepared for business, not battle. Adrian sat at the plaintiff's table with his high-powered legal team, Robert Chin and 2 associates from the city's most expensive law firm. They had prepared for what they expected to be a straightforward proceeding where a wealthy man divorced his wife and kept most of his assets. Camila sat alone at the defendant's table with Zoe, who had insisted on representing her friend personally. The contrast was stark. Team Adrian looked like they were preparing for a corporate merger, while Team Camila looked like they were simply showing up to accept whatever terms were offered. Judge Morrison reviewed the initial paperwork with the weary expression of a man who'd presided over hundreds of similar cases. Rich husband wants divorce, wife will get some money, everyone moves on with their lives. He'd seen this movie countless times. "This is a petition for dissolution of marriage filed by Mr. Adrian Montgomery against Mrs. Camila Montgomery," Judge Morrison announced. "Mr. Chin, you may proceed with your opening statement." Robert Chin stood up with the confidence of a man who'd never lost a case like this one. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his suit cost more than most people's cars, and his smile suggested he was about to perform surgery with a butter knife. "Your Honor, this is a straightforward no-fault divorce between 2 adults who have simply grown apart. Mr. Montgomery is prepared to be generous in his settlement offer, providing Mrs. Montgomery with substantial spousal support and allowing her to keep their shared residence. The offer sounded reasonable to anyone who didn't know the full context. Adrian was proposing to give Camila the apartment they'd shared, a modest monthly payment for 5 years, and half of their joint savings account. For a woman divorcing a billionaire, it was almost insulting in its modesty. Mr. Montgomery has built a substantial business empire through his own hard work and entrepreneurial spirit, Robert continued. While he recognizes that Mrs. Montgomery contributed to their household in her own way, the vast majority of their wealth was generated through his individual efforts and should remain with him. Judge Morrison nodded absently, already reaching for his pen to approve what seemed like a fair arrangement. Then Zoe stood up. Your Honor, before you approve any settlement, the court needs to review some additional evidence that fundamentally changes the nature of these proceedings. Robert Chen's confident expression flickered for just a moment. Objection, Your Honor. We've reviewed all relevant financial documents. There are no surprises here. Your Honor, Zoe continued calmly, Mr. Montgomery's petition is based on the premise that this is a no-fault divorce between two people who simply grew apart. The evidence I'm about to present proves that this is actually a case of systematic marital misconduct that violates the terms of a legally binding prenuptial agreement. Adrian's face went pale. Beside him, Robert frantically shuffled through his papers, looking for any mention of a prenup that his client had somehow forgotten to disclose. Mr. Chin, Judge Morrison said sternly, did your client fail to inform you about a prenuptial agreement? Your Honor, my client assured me that no such agreement existed. All eyes turned to Adrian, who looked like a man watching his execution. I forgot about it. It was years ago. I didn't think it was relevant. You forgot about a prenuptial agreement? Judge Morrison's voice rose with incredulity. Mr. Montgomery, how exactly does someone forget about a legal document that governs the dissolution of their marriage? Zoe stepped forward with a manila folder that would change everything. Your Honor, I have a copy of the prenuptial agreement signed by both parties 3 months before their wedding. I also have evidence that Mr. Montgomery has been engaged in an extramarital affair for nearly a year, which directly violates the terms of this agreement. The courtroom erupted. Reporters who had expected to cover a routine celebrity divorce suddenly realized they were witnessing something much more dramatic. Adrian's legal team huddled together in panic while their client sat frozen in his chair. Robert Chin tried to regain control. Your Honor, even if such an agreement exists, we need time to review its validity and— The agreement is perfectly valid, Zoe interrupted. It was drafted by a retired Illinois State Supreme Court justice with 40 years of experience. It was signed by both parties in front of witnesses and properly notarized. And it's about to cost Mr. Montgomery everything he owns. Judge Morrison took the prenup and began reading. His eyebrows climbed higher with each paragraph, and by the time he reached the infidelity clause, his mouth had fallen open. Mr. Montgomery, the judge said slowly, according to this document, if you engage in marital infidelity, your wife becomes entitled to all marital assets and any property that has been commingled with marital funds. Do you understand what this means? Adrian's voice came out as barely a whisper. I understand. And Miss Patterson, you're claiming that your client can prove such infidelity occurred? Zoe smiled for the first time that morning. Yes, Your Honor. Extensively. What followed was 2 hours of the most devastating character assassination in Chicago legal history. Zoe presented bank statements showing Adrian's expenditures on his mistress. Hotel receipts documenting their romantic getaways. Photographs of intimate dinners and shopping trips. Text messages between Adrian and Sophia discussing their future together. But the most damaging evidence was the recording of Adrian's confession. This is a conversation between Mr. and Mrs. Montgomery recorded in their home 6 weeks ago, Zoe announced, pressing play on a device that would destroy Adrian's life. Adrian's voice filled the courtroom, admitting to the affair, confessing that he'd stopped loving his wife, and dismissing their marriage as a mistake. Every word was clear, undeniable, and legally devastating. As the recording played, Adrian seemed to physically shrink in his chair. Sophia Bennett, who had been sitting in the gallery expecting to watch her boyfriend's smooth divorce, looked like she might be sick. Even Robert Chin appeared to be calculating how quickly he could withdraw from the case. Your Honor, Zoe continued after the recording ended, Mr. Montgomery didn't just cheat on his wife. He used marital funds to finance his affair. He lied under oath in his initial filing when he claimed this was a no-fault divorce. and he attempted to defraud Mrs. Montgomery by hiding the existence of the prenuptial agreement. Judge Morrison looked at Adrian with something approaching disgust. "Mr. Montgomery, is there anything about this evidence that is factually incorrect?" Adrian's lawyer frantically whispered in his ear, but there was nothing to say. The evidence was overwhelming, recorded, and undeniable. "No, Your Honor," Adrian said quietly. "And you understand that according to the prenuptial agreement you signed, your wife is now entitled to all marital assets?" "I understand." Judge Morrison turned to Robert Chin. "Does your client wish to contest the validity of the prenuptial agreement or dispute any of the evidence presented?" Robert looked at his client, then at the mountain of evidence against him, then back at the judge. In his 30-year career, he'd never seen a case this hopeless. "No, Your Honor. We do not contest the evidence." "Then this court finds that Mr. Montgomery has materially breached the terms of his prenuptial agreement through documented marital misconduct. All assets subject to the agreement will transfer to Mrs. Montgomery as specified in the original document." The gavel came down with a sound that echoed through the courtroom like thunder. Adrian Montgomery had just lost everything. The silence that followed Judge Morrison's ruling lasted exactly 3 seconds before chaos erupted throughout courtroom 4B. Reporters scrambled to capture every moment of what was already being called the most shocking divorce settlement in Chicago history. Adrian sat motionless at the plaintiff's table, staring at the judge as if he couldn't process what had just happened. His team of expensive lawyers shuffled papers frantically, looking for any legal maneuver that might salvage their client's fortune. But they all knew the truth: the case was over, and their client was financially destroyed. Robert Chin stood up on shaking legs. "Your Honor, we request an immediate recess to review the implications of this ruling. Surely there must be some provision for—" "Mr. Chin," Judge Morrison interrupted, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "your client signed a legally binding contract. He violated the terms of that contract through his own choices. The law is clear and my ruling stands." Zoe leaned over to whisper in Camila's ear. "It's done. Everything is yours." Camila nodded, but she felt strangely empty. The victory she'd worked so hard to achieve should have felt more satisfying. Instead, she just felt tired and ready for this chapter of her life to end. "Mrs. Montgomery," Judge Morrison continued, "the court will need to review a complete asset inventory to execute the transfer of property as specified in your prenuptial agreement. I'm ordering both parties to provide full financial disclosure within 30 days. Your Honor," Robert tried one last desperate gambit, "the scope of this transfer is unprecedented. Mr. Montgomery's business empire employs thousands of people. Surely the court can consider the broader economic impact. Mr. Chin, your client should have considered the broader economic impact before violating his marriage vows. The prenuptial agreement makes no exceptions for business holdings or employment concerns. The transfer will proceed as written." From the gallery, a voice called out that made everyone turn. "She can have him. I don't want any part of this disaster." Sophia Bennett stood up, her face flushed with humiliation and rage. The young woman who had spent nearly a year dreaming of becoming Mrs. Adrian Montgomery now looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. "Miss Bennett," Judge Morrison said sternly, "you will remain silent or be removed from this courtroom." But Sophia wasn't finished. "He told me he was going to leave her anyway. He said the marriage was already over. He said she didn't care about him anymore." "Miss Bennett," the judge warned again. "He promised me we'd have a life together. He bought me jewelry, took me on trips, made me believe." Sophia's voice broke as the full scope of her situation became clear. Not only was Adrian broke, but their relationship had been built on lies and stolen money. Security moved toward her, but Sophia gathered what remained of her dignity and walked out of the courtroom, leaving behind the man who had destroyed both his marriage and her future. Adrian watched her leave with the expression of a man seeing his final hope disappear. Robert Chin tried to get his attention, but Adrian seemed to be in shock. "The court will reconvene in 30 days to finalize the asset transfer," Judge Morrison announced. "Mr. Montgomery, I strongly advise you to cooperate fully with this process. Any attempt to hide or transfer assets will result in contempt charges and possible criminal prosecution." As the gavel fell for the final time, Adrian finally seemed to understand the magnitude of what had just happened. He turned to look at Camila with something that might have been desperation. "Camila," he said, his voice cracking, "we need to talk. This is insane. You can't take everything. Think about what we had together. Think about—" "Mr. Montgomery," Zoe interrupted firmly, "my client has no obligation to discuss anything with you. All future communication should go through legal counsel. But this is ridiculous. She's taking billions of dollars because I made a mistake. The punishment doesn't fit the crime. Camila stood up slowly, gathering her purse and the copies of documents that had just made her one of the wealthiest women in America. For the first time since the hearing began, she looked directly at her soon-to-be ex-husband. Adrian, she said quietly, you didn't make a mistake. You made choices. For almost a year you chose to lie to me every single day. You chose to spend our money on another woman. You chose to plan a future with someone else while keeping me as a convenient placeholder. You chose to treat our marriage vows like they were meaningless. Adrian opened his mouth to respond, but Camila continued. Most importantly, you chose to sign a prenuptial agreement without reading it because you were so arrogant you thought you'd never get caught. Every choice was yours, Adrian. These are just the consequences. She turned to leave, then paused and looked back at him one final time. Oh, and Adrian? The prenup also states that you're responsible for all legal fees and court costs. My father made sure to include that clause too. As Camila walked out of the courtroom with Zoe, the magnitude of the asset transfer was already becoming clear to the reporters and legal observers. Montgomery Developments, valued at over $3 billion. Luxury properties across the Midwest. Investment portfolios worth hundreds of millions. Cars, jewelry, art collections, and business partnerships. All of it now belonged to Camila Montgomery. Outside the courthouse, news crews were already setting up for live broadcasts. The story had everything viewers loved. Wealth, betrayal, justice, and a spectacular downfall. Headlines were being written across the country about the billionaire who lost everything because he couldn't keep his prenup in mind while cheating on his wife. Robert Chin caught up with Adrian in the courthouse hallway, where his client stood staring at the marble floor like a man trying to process a terminal diagnosis. Adrian, we need to discuss your options. There might be grounds for appeal, or we could argue that the prenup is unconscionable. Is it? Adrian asked quietly. Unconscionable? What do you mean? I mean legally. Can we actually argue that? Robert hesitated. In his honest professional opinion, the prenup was ironclad and completely enforceable. Thomas Roberts had crafted it perfectly, and Adrian had signed it willingly. It would be a difficult argument to make, Robert admitted. How difficult? Very difficult. Possibly impossible. Adrian laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. So I'm broke. You're not completely broke. You'll retain ownership of your childhood home, assuming you can prove it was never commingled with marital assets. And you'll have whatever personal effects aren't considered community property. My childhood home is worth maybe $200,000. Last week I was worth $3 billion. Adrian. Get out of my sight, Robert. Send me your bill. Assuming I can pay it. As Adrian walked away, Robert Chin realized he was watching the complete destruction of a man who had thought himself untouchable. In his arrogance, Adrian Montgomery had bet everything on his ability to outsmart his wife and lost spectacularly. The prenup that was supposed to protect him had become the instrument of his total annihilation. And the quiet, underestimated wife he'd planned to discard had just become one of the most powerful women in Chicago. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Camila Montgomery, who had decided to keep her married name for business purposes, stood in the executive office that had once belonged to Adrian, looking out at the Chicago skyline she now owned a significant piece of. The transition had been surreal. One day she was a financial advisor helping other people manage their money, the next she was the CEO of a billion-dollar real estate empire. The irony wasn't lost on her that Adrian's infidelity had given her everything he'd worked his entire adult life to build. Mrs. Montgomery? Her new assistant, Rebecca, poked her head through the door. James Harrison is here for your 2 o'clock meeting. Camila smiled and smoothed her charcoal gray suit. The last 6 months had been a whirlwind of legal proceedings, business decisions, and media attention. She'd been featured on the cover of Forbes as the woman who won everything, and her story had inspired countless articles about prenuptials, infidelity, and justice. But the most important change in her life was walking through her office door right now. James Harrison was nothing like Adrian. Where her ex-husband had been flashy and commanding, James was steady and thoughtful. A former federal prosecutor turned corporate attorney, he'd been hired to help Camila navigate the legal complexities of suddenly owning a massive business empire. Somewhere between reviewing contracts and restructuring corporate hierarchies, they discovered they had far more in common than just business. How did the board meeting go? James asked, settling into the chair across from her desk. Better than expected. The transition is almost complete. Montgomery Developments is officially under new management, and the stock price has actually gone up since the announcement. It turned out that investors preferred Camila's careful, strategic approach to business over Adrian's risky, ego-driven decision-making. Under her leadership, the company had already secured 3 major contracts and improved relationships with contractors who had grown tired of Adrian's arrogant demands. What about the charitable foundation? Camila's face lit up with genuine excitement. That's the best news. That's the best news. We received approval for the Women's Financial Independence Foundation. We'll start providing legal aid and financial counseling to women going through difficult divorces next month. James leaned back with a smile that made Camila's heart skip slightly. You're going to change a lot of lives. That's the plan. If my experience taught me anything, it's that knowledge is power. Too many women get steamrolled in divorce proceedings because they don't understand their rights or can't afford good representation. The foundation had become Camila's passion project. Using a portion of Adrian's former wealth, she was creating a network of resources to help women protect themselves from financial abuse and manipulation. Free legal consultations, financial literacy classes, and emergency grants for women escaping controlling relationships. Speaking of changing lives, James said, pulling out an official-looking document, I have the final paperwork on the Sophia Bennett situation. Camila's expression grew serious. After the divorce, Sophia had tried to sue both Camila and Adrian, claiming she'd been deceived about Adrian's financial situation and deserved compensation for her emotional distress. The lawsuit had been frivolous, but it had dragged on for months. The judge dismissed all her claims with prejudice, James continued. She can't refile and she's responsible for court costs. Her lawyer withdrew from the case last week. Good. I almost felt sorry for her, but then I remembered she knew he was married when she started the affair. Sophia's life had fallen apart spectacularly after the divorce. Her father had fired her from Bennett and Associates, unwilling to keep an employee who had helped destroy his business partnership. She'd been evicted from her expensive apartment when the payments from Adrian stopped coming. Last Camila had heard, Sophia was working at a retail store and living with roommates, learning the hard way that being a rich man's mistress wasn't a sustainable career plan. What about Adrian? Camila asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. He's living in his childhood home and working as a sales associate at a car dealership. Robert Chin told me Adrian applied for several executive positions, but word has gotten around about what happened. No one wants to hire someone who lost $1 billion empire because he couldn't read a contract. Camila felt a mixture of satisfaction and something that might have been pity. Adrian had gone from penthouse to poverty in 6 months, a fall that was both spectacular and entirely self-inflicted. He tried to contact you again last week, James added carefully. Left a message with Rebecca asking if you'd consider some kind of settlement arrangement. What did you tell Rebecca to say? That all communication should go through legal counsel, and that you have no interest in revising the court's decision. Camila nodded. Adrian had been trying to reach her for months, sometimes apologetic, sometimes angry, always desperate. She'd blocked his number after he'd left a particularly pathetic voicemail begging her to remember what we once meant to each other. He made his choices, she said firmly. I'm not responsible for fixing the consequences. A knock on the door interrupted their conversation. Rebecca appeared again, this time with an expression of barely contained excitement. Mrs. Montgomery, there's a couple here to see you. They said you changed their life. Camila and James exchanged glances. Since the foundation launched, they'd been getting visits from women who had used their services to escape bad marriages or protect themselves from financial abuse. Send them in. A woman in her 40s entered with a teenage girl who looked remarkably like her. Both were well-dressed and confident, but Camila could see traces of recent stress in their faces. Mrs. Montgomery, the woman said, extending her hand, I'm Lisa Martinez and this is my daughter Elena. We wanted to thank you personally. Please sit down. Tell me how we were able to help. Lisa's story was heartbreakingly familiar. A controlling husband who had gradually isolated her from friends and family while taking control of all their finances. When she finally decided to leave, she discovered he'd been hiding assets and planning to use expensive lawyers to ensure she got as little as possible in the divorce. I found your foundation online and called the helpline, Lisa explained. Your lawyers reviewed my case for free and discovered that my husband had been transferring money to offshore accounts. Without your help, I would have gotten almost nothing. How did everything turn out? The judge awarded me half of everything, including the money he tried to hide. Elena and I have our own apartment now, and I'm starting nursing school in the fall. Elena spoke up for the first time. My mom is the strongest person I know. She saved us both. Camila felt tears threatening and had to blink them back. This was why she'd started the foundation, to make sure other women had the resources and support she'd been lucky enough to receive from her father. I'm so proud of both of you, Camila said. It takes incredible courage to rebuild your life from scratch. After Lisa and Elena left, Camila stood at her window again, watching the city below. Somewhere out there, Adrian was probably finishing his shift at the car dealership, going home to a house that represented the only thing he had left from his former life. Sophia was working retail, learning to live on a budget that didn't include designer handbags and expensive dinners. Do you ever feel guilty? James asked quietly. Camila considered the question seriously. Sometimes. Not about Adrian, he earned every bit of what happened to him. But sometimes I think about how different things could have been if he'd just been honest with me. What do you mean? If he'd come to me 2 years ago and said he wasn't happy, that he wanted something different, we could have had an amicable divorce. He would have kept most of his money, I would have been hurt but moved on, and Sophia wouldn't have been caught in the middle of someone else's marriage. But that's not what he chose. No. He chose to lie, cheat, and manipulate. He chose to treat me like I was disposable while planning to discard me for someone younger. He chose to sign a prenup without reading it because he was so arrogant he thought he'd never face consequences. Camila turned from the window and looked at James, who had become so much more than just her attorney over the past few months. I learned something important from all of this, she continued. Sometimes the universe has a sense of justice that we can't see until afterwards. Adrian thought he was so smart, so untouchable. He thought he could outsmart everyone around him. But his own arrogance became the trap that destroyed him. And what about you? What's next for Camila Montgomery? She smiled, the first completely genuine smile she'd felt in over a year. I'm going to build something better than what Adrian ever dreamed of. The foundation is just the beginning. I want to use this money to help people, to build things that matter, to make sure other women never have to go through what I experienced. That sounds like a pretty amazing legacy. Better than a billion-dollar real estate empire built on ego and greed. As the sun set over Chicago, Camila realized that Adrian's betrayal had given her something more valuable than money or property. It had given her the chance to discover who she really was when everything she thought she knew was stripped away. She was stronger than she'd imagined, smarter than Adrian had ever given her credit for, and more capable of building a meaningful life than she'd ever believed possible. The prenup that was supposed to protect Adrian had instead freed her to become the woman she was always meant to be. And for the first time since her marriage began falling apart, Camila Montgomery was genuinely happy. 6 blocks away, Adrian Montgomery finished his shift selling used cars and drove home to his empty childhood house, still unable to understand how he'd lost everything to the quiet wife he'd so badly underestimated. Justice, it turned out, had been served with perfect precision.